Today's topic, top trending organizational risks for 2022 and beyond. My name is Frank Buckless and I am Dean of the Poole College of Management. Please check your phones, make sure they're turned off or silence mode. Also, please make sure you grab some of the great food we have in the back. This is the 7th in the PNC Thought Leadership Series. This series was a partnership with PNC Bank as a way to bring together academics and industry professionals to talk about topics and business challenges that are confronting us today. This is how we think and do at NC State and the Poole College of Management. Want to thank PNC Bank for their support of this event. I also want to recognize Jim Hansen, who is Regional President for PNC Bank and a very good supporter of NC State. He currently serves on our chair of our Board of Visitors for NC State and has been very engaged with the Poole College and the university. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mark Beasley, who is the KPMG Professor and Director of Enterprise Risk Management here at Poole College. Mark is the founding director of ERM here, and he leads our efforts to be really a global thought leader for both our students and for industry. Mark frequently works with boards of directors and senior management of organizations to help them with their risk oversight processes. And with that, I will welcome Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for the opportunity to lead a conversation with a number of experts in the field of various sort of lines of disciplines in the enterprise kind of community. As Frank said, I am the director of the Poole College's Enterprise Risk Management Initiative, and we spend a lot of time helping organizations think about risks that are on the horizon as they look into the future, particularly in the context of their strategy. And when you think about the last couple of years, we've had plenty of examples of risk, and they continue to unfold with what's happening in Eastern Europe right now, and disruption is just becoming a new normal that we need to prepare for. So I'm excited to have a conversation here with an awesome set of panelists. And let me briefly introduce them, and then I'm going to ask them to go a little deeper and provide what I said to them. Give us the color commentary of who you are, because I think that's always helpful for everybody to get a background. But I'm going to begin with two over from me, David Quintillo, who worked at UPS for 36 years, spent a lot of his career in the supply chain challenges of running and helping lead that for a global company, UPS in Atlanta. We all are very familiar with that organization, and you can imagine the challenges of a supply chain management in a company like UPS. And so he comes in with that deep experience in the supply chain space, and is currently advising. He's now retired, although you look at David and you go, how do you retire? But I'm envious, but that's good. But is advising companies, as you can imagine, he's in pretty high demand for them. To my immediate left is Josh Stewart. Josh is the Senior VP and Head of Talent Acquisition at PNC Bank, based in Pittsburgh. Thank you for coming down. Enjoy the weather while you're here. Josh has spent his career in the talent space, and like supply chain, we all know how challenging talent acquisition and retention is in this environment that we're in, and obviously leading talent through the last 2 years has had a special elements of challenge for that. So Josh is going to bring sort of that talent dimension as we get in our conversation. And then I'm pleased to have a colleague, Steve Markham. Steve and I have been at the college for most of our time here. We've been overlapping together. Steve works as a professor in our area that is focused on the entrepreneurship innovation. We're going to tap into Steve's experience and his research, his teaching in the management of innovation and entrepreneurship that he's led here at NC State. But he also took a recent stint working with Toshiba, leading some of their global portfolio from a strategy lens. And so he brings in an academic but very real world applied background and experience. So I'm pleased to have all three as a part of our panel. So let me, though, allow each of them to give a little more color. And Josh, since you're right here, I'll just see if you could add a little more about Josh. Tell us who you are and a little bit about,
Sure thing, yeah.
Put a little more context.
Well, it all started in the year no, I won't go back that far. I'm Josh Stewart. As mentioned, lead an organization called Talent Acquisition and Outreach at PNC. And I've been doing that particular role for all of 5 weeks now, we're counting. But I've been at PNC for just under 20 years, so that'll be my anniversary year next year. I've spent half my career in consumer lending and half my career in human resources, which is a whole other panel discussion and another day to talk about that transition from one to the other. But I did so through the diversity and inclusion work at PNC. And so for a long time, I worked for our Chief Diversity Officer, leading diversity initiatives for the company, and then moved into leadership and executive development, and then into the talent space. The role right before this was leading campus recruiting, some of our specialty groups, early career recruiting, and some of our new strategies for recruiting, which we can talk about later, but even getting into high school recruiting and what that looks like as a way to build a pipeline and different strategies for a recruiting approach. I live in Pittsburgh. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. As they say in Pittsburgh, even if you leave, you always come back. But today, I'm happy to be here at 70 and not 30-something degrees. So thank you for having me. I'm excited for the discussion.
Thank you, Josh. David, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'd like to start off with, I am a graduate of North Carolina State University in 1989. Back then, it was accounting for me, and the transition from the financial world to the supply chain world happened over 36 years at UPS, and the last 18 of that was spent in the supply chain side of UPS. A lot of people don't know how large that side of UPS is and exactly what they do, but once I got over there, I didn't want to leave. It's much different than the big brown machine that those of you know. It's more of a supply chain 3PL consulting arm, and working directly with companies there, and that's why I chose to stay on that side. And multiple roles in operations, as well as finance and accounting and sales and things like that. I do live in Atlanta, wife of 22 years as of last week. I did remember, which was good. And my son is 18. He's a senior, and he will be graduating and going to college there in Georgia. So
That's awesome.
That's me.
Thank you. Steve?
All right, thanks, Mark, and thanks to PNC for hosting this. It's much appreciated. It adds a lot of depth to our program. So I've been here 30 years. So I started at the year and the month, actually, the College of Management got started. And one of the first things I did there was started this thing called technology, entrepreneurship and commercialization with some colleagues from around campus. And that's a process, obviously, for identifying and commercializing, finding the path to market for new technologies coming out of NC State. That's used by universities and companies around the world, and actually used it to start a few companies here at NC State, technologies, kind of ranging from computer science to life sciences and back to materials again. One of the first ones worked on actually went public in 2013 and was acquired by LabCorp in 2015. So kind of got that entrepreneurial kind of side to this as well. With this process, I also worked with a number of large companies on the consulting side. I helped found BP's Innovation Board and ran that for 13 years. And got to see kind of the really inside of that big spill down in the Gulf as far as what was happening there. And then that kind of led me to, was consulting with Toshiba, and then I made kind of the rookie error of taking a job with them. And so I was the Senior Vice President of Global Strategy and Portfolio, which meant I actually, even that, I was going to say dumb enough, I guess that's true. Dumb enough to take P&L responsibility for that division as well, where we've revitalized. It was kind of a turnaround situation. We revitalized the portfolio, restructured the decision-making apparatus within the company. One of the kind of side things I got to do there was Toshiba had 7 different printer businesses, and I was able to consolidate those into a single global printer business. And I'm a tree farmer.
A tree farmer. Okay, good.
That's how I kind of introduced myself. I'm a tree farmer.
Well, thank you for introducing yourself, and just for our audience, thank you for being here. And I also want to say thank you to the virtual audience as well that's joining us from the wide world web. We're going to make our focus on thinking about, risk, the title of today's panel is looking at risk for 2022 and beyond. But before we look into the future, I want to turn and look a little bit to the recent past from a risk lens. And as we think about risk, we always are focused in the ERM initiative talking about, we want to know about risk because it's important to our strategy. It's not just to know risk, but it's like, why do I care? Well, it's going to affect my business strategically. So it's all about the strategy. So as you think about the roles you've played over the last really 2 years, as we think about the pandemic plus other events, what are some of the big ticket risk management lessons that you've sort of personally have observed as you think back over the last couple of years? So Josh, let me just turn to you on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my first reaction when you said we were going to reflect back, I thought, do we have to?
Yeah, really.
Because talent is tired, HR is tired. It's been a really, really wild ride, certainly for everyone. And human resources as a function showed its value in ways that I don't know that anyone could have imagined. And so to me, the risk issues, everything got turned over. Every policy, every process that we had relied on for years had to change overnight, whether it was health policies relating to understanding the concerns or employees who are presenting with COVID-19 and then tracking that. That's something we never had to do. Mm-hmm. We had to never worry about vaccination status. And so that was new. And what were we going to do? How would we navigate that? Thinking about talent acquisition, the simple things like what do we do? How do we interview someone now? How do we do that virtually? And what is the equity and the fairness in the process of a virtual interview when you can't see them, when you can't interact with them, and how do you build trust and relationship? And so that's hard. And so there really was not any policy that didn't change over the course of just a couple of weeks, really. And then now looking back at it and saying, okay, we actually I think a lot of those things were better than what we used to have. And so what do we keep? What do we kind of go back to the way it used to be, if there is really such a thing? And then how we, certainly all of this is in support of the organization. But an example, many of you may be familiar with the PPP that was introduced during the pandemic. We as an organization decided that we would resource the needs of servicing our small business customers who were going through the PPP process with PNC talent. And so in a matter of weeks, we had to find thousands of employees across the organization and ask them to be reassigned to support that work. Because we thought, well, no better people to support our customers than the people who know our customers. And so we were asking administrative professionals, people in lending services to stop what they were doing and do something entirely different. Well, there's risk in that. How do you train people quickly? How do you get people ready to maybe be in a customer-facing role where they've not had to do that before, but that's what we needed. And so we had to really turn on a dime. And we learned a lot about, now this will translate into kind of a gig economy. And so how do we take the lesson learned and talk about short-term assignments and create a whole new way of leveraging talent in the organization? So there's good that has come with it, but a lot of risk and challenge.
David, how about you? When you think back the last couple of years, what lessons have you learned from the challenges that we've all had to deal with?
Yeah, I think from a lesson standpoint, certainly, what Josh articulated was a common theme. But overall, I think capacity was a big lesson in creating more variable capacity in planning for major ebbs and flows. Now, this was epic, for sure, but the ebbs and flows were the real challenges that our clients faced during that time. And we would get panic-stricken calls saying, I can't get product from Asia over here, or I've got plane loads of product coming and I have nowhere to put it. So that's the ebb and flow that we saw, and the same with people is we can't get people. How can you help us? So being prepared for those ebbs and flows, I think is one of the big lessons learned. But it is somewhat like a 100-year flood, right? Is how much are you going to plan for? Are you going to plan for that epic state, or at least have the variability or an enterprise risk program that lays a blueprint for what to do? That's where I think there was some lacking out there. And I think one thing, especially as we've all seen the supply chain challenges, is people would have an enterprise program for risk, but it wouldn't bring in all the partners in their supply chains, whether it's the suppliers or whether it's third-party logistics. So you have to have a we program, not just get that false confidence of having one within your own organization. So I think those are some of the challenges and lessons that we saw for most of our clients.
Good. And Steve, how about you?
I think budget uncertainty was just a huge problem. It affects future plans. So if you're thinking globally about what's your strategy and the portfolio, and these are not kind of quick decisions that you make. They're often long-term, and so you're midstream through into a large development program or entering into a new market, and all of a sudden your budget is very much up in the air. And we just didn't anticipate how long that would take to, well, it's still not resolved. So I think just budget uncertainty, knowing what can we do, what can't we do within the next few months or year was really probably the hardest part.
I want to circle back, and some of our audience are students and some of the ones that will be viewing it online. But David, I'm going to start back with you because you have an 18-year-old son.
Yes.
So as you're coaching your 18-year-old son about, here's what I learned when we dealt with a pandemic, we dealt with social unrest, we dealt with a Ukrainian crisis, it keeps going on.
Right.
But what would you coach a young professional to help them be better prepared for what you just have had to deal with?
Yeah, I think one thing that separated some of the folks that were better able to tread through this time was making quick decisions. So decision making, it obviously comes from planning experience, but don't be afraid to make those decisions, especially in a crisis like this. So the first movers were the ones that did better, whether they went and got space. They broke paradigms. In fact, we broke paradigms at UPS because we had to get things up and running quicker. So you talk about hiring, we had to hire hundreds and hundreds of people to put up brand new warehouses and increase capacity over 30% because of what was happening, because of the increased need for pandemic supplies, e-commerce driven. So being able to make those decisions and break kind of paradigms within the company are real key factors, and those are leadership traits that you really need to instill in the folks today.
Josh, I'll turn to you because you've done part of your role as career development, coaching. How would you coach a young person, a college grad that's coming into PNC, for example, to be better prepared to navigate what we've experienced?
So just what you were sharing now reminds me of the phrase I used in the middle of it all. I said, well, and the winds have changed. I think it's a proverb of some sort. Some build walls and other build windmills, right? And the winds have changed. And so we need windmill builders. And so you can get entrenched and say, this is the policy, this is how we do it, right? But those who are agile in their thinking or thinking innovatively or coming up with new solutions, being solutions oriented, are the ones that after the pandemic, after this kind of unrest, are prevailing, because now we're sticking with the new policies. The change has been implemented and their ideas are attached to that. The second thing that I would say, and I know you, as students you hear this a lot, but the power of your network is critical. And so as we all migrate to working from home, the question is, how do you build culture? How do you build connection virtually? And so much of what we do is based on our success was based on the connections we had, that some of which was built in person. So how do you do that again? And being really intentional about building relationships even when you're sitting at home, even when you're nowhere near an office. It's much harder and requires much more intentionality. And we can come back later on this topic, but we have some new information for our own organization that suggests that success, one of the success factors is the size and the speed of your network. And so, doing that now is even harder, but still even maybe more critical.
Yeah. Steve, you're in the classroom all the time. So what's coming out as far as your perspectives as you think about the last couple of years, as you think about the students you teach?
Well, I think we just heard the two main themes that I thought about in the rest of the questions, which is you got to keep moving forward, and trust in relationships. You know, in a situation like this, you got to trust people when they're at home, and you're going to have people asking for a lot of exceptions for what you've done in the past, and you're going to ask for a lot of exceptions, both inside and outside the company. And if you don't have a pre-existing network, trusting relationships, it's just you're going to be isolated, and you're not going to be able to move forward with that. And you just have to keep moving forward. You can't kind of do the armadillo thing. You got to move forward.
Got to go forward. So again, our focus of this panel is looking at risk for 2022 and beyond. So now we're going to transition and look to 22. We're I guess a quarter in, but we have more of 2022 ahead, plus early 2023. Each year, the ERM Initiative releases a research study that looks at what executives see are the risk on the horizon for the next year and then a decade out. We're going to tie into some of that. But before I mention some of the themes that came out of this past year's research report, I wanted to get the panelists' perspective of when you think about risk on thinking into 2022, early 2023, what pops out as far as what risk are on your mind most as you look into the next 12 months? So David, let me go to you first and see what thoughts you have, just broad themes about risk that could be what executives need to be thinking about.
Yeah, one thing that pops into my head is in my new company, the major requests and the major topics that are coming in to take a look at and get more information on, and the big challenge is labor in the near term. You know, for sure, the Great Resignation hitting director, VP level, and then frontline. You know, for sure, all service industries are fighting for the same pool of people. So you see a significant increase in frontline wages, you know, to you know, fight for that labor. So what's coming out of this is really a rise of robots, AI, data. So it's really fueling this. It was coming anyway, and it's making progress, but you know, through the clients that I deal with now and have in the past, there's not a proliferation of it. I was at Modex last week down in Atlanta, and it's amazing some of the technologies that are coming out, and some that I've been a part of implementing. It works so well, and it helps so much from an efficiency standpoint, combating the dearth of labor. So I think that is both an opportunity and an innovation, but it's also a potential risk. You know, what are the risks with that when we go almost fully automated and it's everything's connected? It's not one automation system, it's by process now, and that's why you can deploy it rapidly, but it all has to tie together through technology. But if you can imagine, we're worried about cyber attacks now. Holy cow. Yeah. When you've got, you know, your entire supply chain is predicated on artificial intelligence and robotics. That's kind of scary. We don't even know what those risks are right now.
Yeah, you've hit on a fundamental concept we always try to get across when we're working with companies is, you know, risk and strategy go together. I'm going to use strategy to resolve a risk or manage a risk, but the new strategy creates its new risk issues. So it's a circular, constant sort of point of focus. Josh, let me get your thoughts on what you see on the horizon for 2022.
I guess you won't be surprised if I say talent.
No, I will not.
All things seem to be pointing back to talent, at least right now in the short term, and I think for the long term too. So when we get to that portion, you won't be surprised if I say talent. So building is then the upskilling and the reskilling. So what do you do with your existing workforce who are in front-level role or frontline roles who may be having their roles automated or parts of their role? Are they ready to be the next person to step into kind of leading that work or operating the AI or whatever it may be? And so using different skill development pathways in the organization and doing it quickly. And so lots of external partnerships, reinventing tuition reimbursement, that kind of thing, right? How to people have access to reskilling and upskilling in the organization. So that becomes the build off of what you just shared. I mean, the very short term is labor cost, is just needing the pipeline of candidates to fill what we have now.
So Steve, we've heard a little bit of a talent innovation connection, but from what you see and what you're thinking about, what do you see in 2022, 2023?
Yeah, I really think inflation is going to be driving an awful lot of decision-making over the next number of months. I don't think we've wrapped our minds around that yet. It's not only going to affect talent and supply chain, but just about every other decision in the organization. Capital markets are going to change. Your access to capital is going to change. This is going to cause variability in financial performance, and the company's ability to respond to that cohesively and together is going to be really challenged. Some parts of the organization will act fast, but maybe not strong enough. Other parts will act very strong, but wait too long. And so, we're going to need something like the inflation response team to make sure, these organizations that are far-flung around the world, you can't have different pricing strategies in one place than in another. At the same time, you have to be flexible to the fact that, your supply chain is going to be variable in terms of capabilities, which is going to put price pressures on, and the gamish that is going to cause within organizations' ability to respond and remain profitable is going to be really, really challenging.
So I mentioned this study that we do. We had 1,450-ish executives respond to give us their perspectives of risk on the horizon for this year. Consistent with what we just heard, the overarching top 10 in the risk for 2022, 6 of the 10 had a talent connection. One of you talked about succession issues. That is the number 2 risk. Labor cost, I've heard that just now, was number 6, I believe. Then there's the concern about innovation and digital capabilities. Can we identify that artificial intelligence, but do we have the skill set to implement it that came out there? So the themes that we just heard are coming through with a perspective of 1,400 or more executives from around the world, that talent is dominating it, but in that also are supply chain challenges, particularly triggered by the pandemic. Has it changed how we do business? Josh, you talked about just the change of process and particularly the supply chain challenges. And then that innovation, will our products, in essence, the new way of delivering products has now shifted to a much more digital footprint, which has the innovation theme. So we're going to take each of those topics, talent, supply chain, and innovation, and go deeper to get a little more depth on each of those risk themes. But I also encourage anybody in here, if you've got a question, just get my attention. We'd love to get you engaged, and I'll turn to look, but if I don't see you, be sure just to raise your hand, and I'd love to get you pulled in too as well. So make sure you know that. Let's now shift to the talent space, which we've been talking about, but as I mentioned, it dominates the top 10 risks for 2022. And as you talked about, the Great Resignation, all that is just incredibly challenging for all kinds of industries. And Josh, naturally, this is a space you live in probably 24/7, and some days you feel like that. Could you provide an overview of what you're seeing as far as what's on your list as emerging talent risk issues? Obviously, I know you can't talk too specific of PNC because you don't want to get in trouble there, but broader themes. What from a talent lens are on your radar?
Yeah, I would say, let's say you were to go to pnc.jobs/careers and look to see how many opportunities we had. It would not be a one-page list of opportunities. We have more open roles and fewer recruiters than we have ever had. That ratio is just upside down. And the number one thing for me right now, just thinking about the day-to-day, is finding operational efficiencies and changing in the recruiting process while managing risk. So there's certainly lots of AI technologies in talent that are emerging, and the questions that we have to wrestle is, do we want to adopt those things? Do we want AI coming in, and we use video interviewing in some cases. You can do sentiment analysis and say, is someone smiling, and what is their reaction on camera, and does that score someone high or low? You know, as an organization, we don't do that. Would there be efficiencies? Could we move faster if we did? Yes, it's not a risk that we're willing to take on right now. But where then in other parts of the process do we find ourselves needing to make changes to the actual process? You know, it's really simple things. It feels like we've started over and say things like, you know what we should have panel interviews, because that will make our process more efficient. So we're doing them, and not that we've not done them in the past, but saying, get everyone together in a room and talk about candidates and hear each other's reactions. I mean, what a wonderful thing for diversity and inclusion. What a wonderful thing for collaboration across teams and lines of business. And so there's going to be benefits to this because we just need to move faster. The job market, the labor cost is going to be a big issue. I just had a dinner last night with one of our recruiters, and he said to me that there was a branch banker who's called us, we called them to apply for a job, because that's now the shift for recruiting. You don't just post and hope that people apply, because they're not going to be applying at the same rates. The shift to a sourcing model, seeking out candidates, building relationships way further in the pipeline, now becomes part of the recruiting model. So the question for us is, that's not a skill that all recruiters have, and so do we have skilled recruiters to do that kind of work. He said to me, this candidate applied for 3 identical roles, essentially at 3 different banks, not in this market. And the candidate called him and said, I have 2 offers. I need your offer by 5 p.m., and was kind of demanding our offer and giving us the timeline. And he hadn't even been interviewed yet. So we were rethinking, you know, how do we just move more quickly with speed through the interviewing process? So that's number one. We can't, changing the employee value proposition to what our employees looking for is going to utterly change. And so everybody has health benefits. Everybody offers tuition reimbursement. What is the thing? How do you position that? How do you position your culture, your inclusivity, as a new way of articulating brand, because that's what candidates are looking for. They're applying to a culture, not necessarily applying to a job, because they have lots and lots and lots of the same kinds of jobs to pick from. So that your culture is now the differentiator. So managing the culture becomes a talent initiative. I think we shared in the back, I said we could probably do the whole hour just on talent things, but I'll try not to do that. Managing through the shift in the workplace environment will be another huge challenge. Certainly there will be people in our organization who will continue to be in office and frontline, but many will not. And so how do you maintain a culture? How do you maintain learning and development? How do you create networks? And how do you challenge kind of some of the older school thinking that people have to be in person in order to progress through a company? It's a big change. It's a big cultural change for managers to deal with. We thankfully have implemented some, we call them leadership standards, that help us as our guidepost of what we expect of leaders. So we have a structure we can point back to that helps to navigate that. And that was in place, you know, long before the last couple of years. And then the last thing, and I mentioned it quickly, is DE&I. So we've not maybe talked a lot about social unrest and all the things that have also happened in the last couple of years. That becomes more and more critical. I think we got to a place just leading up to the last 2 years where we thought, oh, we're making a lot of progress. Not we, PNC, but just in general. And then we realized we hadn't. And so we've had to kind of come back to our roots and say, okay, no, not starting over. Well, there were a lot of things that went unaddressed. It was kind of a race to inclusion, and we didn't necessarily think critically about the diversity piece. And so now let's back up and re-engage. And so we really, that's an emerging risk for us. Not a risk, but emerging opportunity, just to double down and rethink about that all over again. So I'll stop there. There's lots more to share.
I think you mentioned earlier high school.
High school.
Can you talk a little bit about going deeper back in time as far as seeking out potential candidates?
We acknowledge, and this is a PNC we now, we acknowledge that we don't, we were not being intentional about recruiting outside of, we have a lot of four-year students through internships and development programs. And as we look at our job descriptions, we had done a lot of work to say we actually don't need a college degree in lots of our roles. We weren't intentional about recruiting outside of that pool. And so a couple of years ago, we created a high school recruiting initiative. and go right into high schools, and we talk about banking. We talk about banking as a career, not as necessarily a financial literacy, although we do that too. And the light bulbs for students to say, I had no idea that I would even consider banking, because they didn't know what it was. They're not necessarily a consumer of banking. If we're in low to moderate income schools, there might be a large distrust of banking. And so the pipeline from high school to banking was pretty thin. When we come out of the program, we do this in collaboration with many, many schools, or many, many employers, large employers. Banking is their number one pick. It's about building the relationship and the trust with students and talking about the culture and not the job. And then they can see the job as that's the thing I'll do, but this is the family I'll belong to, and I'm good with that. And so now we have 5,000 students going through the high school program in just one market, just one market.
Can I come back with another question? When you think about recruiting, with the remote workforce that we have, people that are outside maybe a PNC market are now available talent potentially.
Absolutely.
So are you looking at talent that may reside in a state that PNC is not a big presence and saying, hey, we could hire them?
100%. So let me take you back to my job of 4 weeks ago in campus recruiting. We went from recruiting from 110 schools to 262 last year.
Wow.
Because we were able to cast a much broader, a wider net to find students, because the location in terms of us getting there to recruit was not important. So we used new tools to go broader. Sometimes we still have to bring students to a particular location for the opportunity or the experience, but the organization at large, we have a lot of opportunities. If you were to go to pnc.jobs/careers, you would find a lot of them are listed as remote, or many locations are listed where perhaps in the past they've only would say Pittsburgh. That's not, I mean, certainly there are still market-based jobs. A lot of our shared services jobs have gone much more broadly, and that has changed in the last 6 months. So I would say, we're they're undertaking an initiative right now to look at all these open requisitions, talk to hiring managers again, about what do you really need? If you sit on one location for one time, it might take you longer to recruit. But if you're open to a couple more locations, that's really going to open up your talent pool and the types of candidates you'll find.
I'm afraid we're going to lose our audience. They're going to all walk out of here and start applying.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I concur with everything that Josh is saying, and I've seen it in my prior job. If you think about, the corporate image that was there years ago of buttoned up, white shirt, tie, which, I've developed an allergy to ties now. That's why I just don't wear them, so works out for me. And things like the uniqueness of individuals is being so embraced now in the corporate cultures, whether it started with facial hair. Imagine that being a policy now, right? And that was only a few years ago. And celebrating unique tattoos, body art, because that couldn't be visual, right? So things like that to embrace really the diversity of people and the inclusion of people in that talent pool has been amazing over the past few years.
David, I want to come back to you and transition the talent. We still want to talk about talent, but come at it from a supply chain angle. Some of the supply chain challenges I hear are a lack of labor, particularly in the logistics space, truck drivers, for example. So from your lens, can you shed a little bit of perspective on how some of the supply chain challenges have a talent concern or risk tied to talent, or creating supply chain challenges?
Yeah, sure, and it's a both supply and a demand issue. It's not just supply, so there's been a significant increase in demand. So the supply for sure is the labor component, but the demand, just to regress a little bit to earlier discussions, there's unknown risks or unintended consequences that happen during these big pandemics or disruptions. So when you think about when it first came out, who would have thought e-commerce would have boomed, right? Because you didn't think, well, everybody's going to stay home, so they're all going to order things online. So e-commerce is going to go through the roof. Who thought cargo capacity would actually shrink? Why? Because international flights got grounded, and commercial airlines cargo space is a component of cargo space.
So you're shrinking that. So it's the whole supply demand was just going in opposite directions. Cargo space, for just as an example, roughly from 2019 to 2021 actually shrunk by 10%, but demand was up 10%. So imagine what has to happen to get all those goods, across the globe with that situation. So, yeah, the supply side. Back to your exact question. It starts with the cargo and getting that capacity, but then when it gets there, it's the labor in the warehouse working, shifts round the clock. You've heard that the Port of Long Beach and LA are working 24/7 to try to clear the backlog. Well, it starts with the cargo waves coming, then it's the truck drivers. There's not enough because of that demand, and some deciding, the pandemic, I'm not working, or I'm retiring. And so you've got stuff sitting on docks, whether it's a warehouse dock or an ocean dock, to get out, and then processing the orders. Because of that demand, you're having to hire more people when you've got less available pool to get that processed within a warehouse. And then in delivery drivers, same thing. It's demand. Now that leads to opportunities. You've seen a ton of crowdsourcing startups, whether it's delivery startups, your Uber type models, and it's the same with freight and filling every inch of capacity within the supply chain network. And the innovative companies are finding ways to do that.
Steve, some of the research, the risk in our study that I keep referring to for current year is looking at just the ability to have skill and talent to deal with big data and data analytic capabilities. But then when you look at a decade, the risk of taking that to how I use that analytical capability to identify innovation opportunities, and will I have the talent to manage innovation as I go into the future? From an innovation entrepreneurship, what are some of the talent challenges that you see that are going to affect our ability to be strategically innovative as an organization?
Yeah, this is really a critical issue. At Toshiba, I help underneath the portfolio planning division. We started a analytics center of excellence for the corporation. Because of that, back to your question, what would I tell young people getting into this? You just have to have an analytics component in your tool bag. But innovation is not a single skill. It's not something that you learn in a class most of the time. We don't have real well-defined innovation paths within organizations. Colleges of management such as ours is just now coming on programs that actually teach innovation from a corporate perspective. So this is, it makes it so that innovation skills are both idiosyncratic and sporadic. And they're not evenly distributed across an organization or even a department. We had, putting on my academic hat for a second, we recently wrote a paper about innovation training. We find out that it's just not happening. And it particularly gets cut in times of distress. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a tough part of it. And analytics just has to go everywhere. We did a big project with Kelly and Apple, and what we were trying to focus on there was not just on the recruiting side to recruit in good people, but to recruit in people that had lower turnover propensities. And so we used natural language processing and some AI models to try to figure out, okay, as we recruit people from the very beginning, how we recruit them to say, okay, the churn is killing us. It's not just lack of people, it's that we're constantly churning. But Mark, to your point about the top risk study, I think it's probably even worse than that, because it kind of focuses on what's just happened in the last couple of years. The fact is, with baby boomers getting to the point of retirement, this was a trend that has that was at a fever pitch even before then. At BP, this was 2013, we were already having this thing called the big shift change. That is, as the older, more experienced people with this idiosyncratic innovation skills were leaving the company, and there wasn't a mechanism to transfer that, right? There's nothing formal about how we transfer innovation skills, or even how we get them to begin with. So the trends here were already at a fever pitch, and then this just really made it worse. I guess if there's a silver lining in that, it's that the nature of remote work has made it so that we have to, and the older guys had to start getting skilled up in terms of some technologies, which would just turn out to be a necessity, and now I think is going to be real strength.
So Josh, I will come back to you because we've touched on just this skill development training from an analytics innovation perspective. How is that factoring into sort of career development opportunities training at PNC?
Something you shared, Stephen, reminded me of one of the not new metrics, but metrics of attention right now is percent new. So what percentage of our employee population is new to the company or new to management? So certainly it's always a statistic or an interesting measure. But now we look at that as a predictor of employees that are all new, or managers who themselves are new. As you look across the organization, what percentage of managers are new, and how can they themselves be new to the company and be imparting, process and procedure, or how we sell, or whatever it is, or connecting with clients. And so we have started to build some very formal structures. We've always had development programs as a really formal development mechanism. And so we're bringing in now, and that is on the rise. And so we are up this year pretty significantly. So we have got 560 people coming through a development program. And the whole idea is rotating around an organization and learning about many parts to help you connect dots. And then they come out as more valuable players because they're seeing this organization in a way that they couldn't in just one singular role. Re-emphasis on early career, so doubling down on our recruiting in places like this will also help. Then we have now started to introduce learning in a new way. So gone are the days of sitting down in a classroom. There's just not a lot of time to do that when you're in a productive role, right? Certainly, I think about my own world, giving up a recruiter for several days of training feels like the requisitions won't get filled. So we may not be able to sacrifice that seat time for days of training. And so new technologies, new learning tools have come forward. They're like learning aggregators. So they sit on top of your learning, and then employees can contribute into them. Here's something that I'm doing, an article that I've read, experience that I've had, and everyone can see it on a feed. And so you can invest in fees, and then it starts to get smarter. It says, Josh has been looking a lot at labor laws, and it'll start feeding you things about labor laws. And so it kind of uses AI and intelligence to start developing you on the path that you want to. And so reinvesting in tools there, reinvesting in upskilling. So there are tech incubators now, like a tech elevator, which is in different markets, or you can send employees to go for short-term reskilling and come back. So we had a teller to tech program for a while. We asked our teller team, hey, are you interested in technology roles? How do you get there from here? Maybe you need something in the middle experience to go do something. It's also about knowing your talent, and this is where I'll end. We don't, and this is not a PNC we necessarily, but just generally, there's not a lot of data sometimes about who's in your own organization and what skills do they have. We bring them in with wonderful skills for the job we need them for today, but maybe they came through a front door that they thought was going to get them started, but I've got a PMP certificate, or I've got a master's, or I just didn't know, what job was available to me. And so now using talent and data and talent intelligence as a whole team we're now building to say, how do we mine our career profiles? How do we mine all the data that we have about our employees now? And when we have an opportunity, say, you have exactly what we need. And so we have to grow that over time. And we'll be implementing a tool here shortly that helps employees see what their next role could be based on that data, not just based on their natural progression in a particular job family.
Josh, just to build on that a little bit, At Toshiba, we had a old skill set, right? Monolithic software experts using waterfall type processes, and that just was not going to get us to the next generation. Yet like you, we can't send people out for training, right? They can't do what we need them to do, but we can't send them out for training either. And so it was a real struggle and a discipline to get people to go get training. But yet that's so critical when you're entering into new markets, new products, trying to do things new. You can't just keep doing the same thing. We had a $450 a week pizza budget just to get people in for training at lunch, sharing skills. Here's the new kinds of programs that we're using. If you don't have that sharing, it's tough to do, especially in this environment.
And I think it's so critical, when you have a large frontline workforce and you need to staff that, you also have to look at that as an opportunity for future growth within the company to fill those positions. I'm a prime example. I was here at State. I started working for UPS, loading trucks at midnight. Right? And so 36 years later, I'm still here. I graduated in accounting and went into accounting at UPS and then different various roles there. So if the frontline workforce knows that there's a path there and is communicated well in the recruiting side of it and proven by folks that have succeeded, you're going to get both frontline and middle and upper management roles filled.
We had a question in the back.
Awesome. I was just going to turn to say, is there a question from the audience? So yes, sir.
Years ago, what do you think the risks are for organizations as alternative payments like crypto? You might accept crypto, you can pay for crypto.
From a customer as an employee payment perspective too. Yeah.
So we dealt with payments a whole lot with Toshiba as a global commerce division, and crypto is going to be important. The remittances to other countries out of the United States is a real problem. It's very expensive to do. Being able to actually send secure payments to other countries is something that crypto is being looked at as the way to solve that problem. If you want to send money to Honduras, for example, you can go to Walmart. You pay $75 to get started. At least that's what it was a couple of years ago. It's hard for banks to do that, and so crypto kind of blockchain, either public or private blockchain type programs, are just going to have to use crypto type currencies for that.
Great question. Yes, Roby.
So a question maybe to you first and then to the panel as well. I think David mentioned preparing for a 100-year flood, sort of this, the cost of doing that. I think we've learned that just as with climate change, 100-year floods happen way more frequently than they used to, right? And I would suspect that other kinds of disruptions, including those caused by climate change, happen more frequently and are likely to happen more frequently. So, I would argue that you're not preparing for a 100-year event, that you're preparing for an event that is likely to be more common in the future. How does that play out? And for you, Mark, where does climate change come in the rankings from your study?
You've got several questions in there. I'll try to limit my response because it's really about them and not me. So a couple of thoughts. One, the idea of disruption. One of the things that we've heard from hundreds of companies is pandemic was on their risk radar, but it was not a top 20, 30 kind of risk. It was on deeper, even though they had experienced SARS and we have a history of knowing it's not 100 years. It's just like in the last 10. But it's the concept of we don't slow down long enough to think about very low probability events that have a catastrophic side to it. We only think about probability. Oh, that won't happen to us. But there's a catastrophic impact side I better pay attention to. So that provides a segue. We're doing our ERM Roundtable Summit next week. One of our speakers is the head of ERM for Levi Strauss.
their whole effort is thinking about how do we prepare for disruption, not the specific cause of this disruption, just to recognize disruption is a reality, and I cannot anticipate the 100-year event. So it's preparing for disruption is a side to it.
Yeah, and I would add to that, really good point, and time limitations didn't expand on the 100-year part, but yeah, the 100-year part, if you look at it, is more around a singular event, whether it's, a pandemic type event. But there's multiple other disruptions that are possible, right? A tornado could come to the same spot, right? So it's combining all of those epic events. Seems like there's more disruption in a shorter time frame now because they're different. They're different disruptions that are happening. And now with cyberspace, that is a significant source of a disruption. And we don't even know what the next disruptions are there. So yeah, you're looking at the next few years, but I would say you need to build in the agility and the risk management programs to be prepared for things you don't even know, right? Instead of preparing for that 100-year event, build in that flexibility and mindset to prepare for something you don't even know about now.
Right, the unknown. We always talk about moving the unknown to known state. To your climate change question, that piece, interestingly, it does not make the top even 20 when you think about 2022. When you look at 2031, and Bruce Branson, my colleague on the project, I can't remember, but it's down there still, except for certain industries. Energies and utilities, it's way up there. So it's industry specific. The way we look at that is climate change we know is a looming fuzzy impact, but we don't know yet what it is. And it's probably not going to bite me in 2022 or 2023. So that's why it's not making the short list like talent is, because it's biting me right now as well as supply chain. So it's interesting because people are very interested from the climate perspective, but executives, it's not high on the short list when you come to it. Richard.
Yeah, we talked all about talent. So you guys were running a business. What would be changes to implement into most responsive to the problem?
Great question. Can I turn to Josh since this is your specialty area?
I would like the business to say what they need first.
Okay.
And not, because when we take an recruiting intake
Well said.
conversation, we say, what do you need? And we will help you fill that need. So I'd like to hear, I will certainly add to it. But
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the technology component is so great right now. The tie-in to understanding the technology platforms of the future, the AI, the big data, the robotics components, and really making sure that we have the workforce of the robotic engineers, the AI programmers, things like that. And everybody needs to be exposed to that, would be my first answer.
Yeah, this is a good question, of course. So if you say, well, what do companies need for a moment of hazard? That as organizations flatten, the role of the manager changes from one of being the expert that is supervising people that do what they do. Now a manager has a much wider span of control, and they're not managing people where they are the resident expert on the team. And so the people on the team have to have a broader view, I'll call it an entrepreneurial mindset, where they understand what the whole business cycle is within the organization so they can contribute to this is how we actually make money as an organization. And I think, not just to pile on the analytics side of things, but in order to make good decisions in that environment, we just have to start making more analytical rather than political kinds of decisions. And by analytical, I'm not just talking about statistics and numbers. I'm talking about the ability to think. So we had a little company called Data Decision Models, which said, okay, we're going to use natural language processing and algorithms to answer any question that you want. Because we can go out and read all the newspapers in 21 different languages. What do you want to know? And the most common response that we got from organizations was, I don't know. I don't know what I don't want. I don't know what I want to know. And so the analytics side of this has got to start with helping people understand what's going on in the business and in the industry, and asking the right questions, having them have the research methodology tools, not just kind of spreadsheets tools, where they understand how to ask the right question, gather the right data, and then do the interpretation. By the way, you may need some statistics to do that too. But analytics is more than just kind of wrangling data in a spreadsheet somewhere. It's got to be tied to the industry phenomena that the company's in.
I would say yes, and leadership capability. I think we are seeing lots of leaders struggle leading people during change. Not knowing how to coach, not knowing how to guide change, not knowing how to manage across difference. Cultural competence is not coming forward. And as we need more and more diversity in our teams, diversity of thought, diversity of leadership, all of it, our most effective managers know what to do with it. Our least effective managers can't coach against it, don't know how to engage the team, because historically they've come up because they're great at the process. I know exactly how to run this thing, which buttons to push, but then when it comes to broader, more expansive controls or larger scope, they're having trouble leading through that. And so testing for leadership capability, specifically the human side, has really got to change.
Yeah, and to add to that, there's some things from a business school that won't go away. And a lot of that is the interpersonal skills, relationship skills, communication. That's going to be even more important, I think, because we don't know what the next disruption is going to be. And instead of planning for that singular event and building out tons of capacity, which is obviously cumbersome to do, it's having the relationships to find alternative ways to get things done. So having the key supplier relationships for your company, third-party relationships, that's key. It's somebody you can pick up the phone and have that relationship with that say, hey, we're in a bind here. We need some help. And those that have the good relationships, it's human nature, they're going to be at the top of the list. And the ones that have treated people like vendors are going to be at the bottom of the list, when a major disruption happens. So having those relationships is key.
I remember that right at the beginning of the pandemic, or a couple of weeks in, the laundry list of things that had to get done or change, was coming, and it was too much. And I remember, and I don't know, Jim, if you remember this in the team, our CEO put out a video, and his closing remark was, I just need our managers to do the next right thing. And that was a big ask, and the managers that would call us and say, what does that mean? I'm not sure. And I'll call employee relations to ask them what the next right thing is. We just need you to have critical decision-making skills. Know in the moment your employee is struggling with X, and 2 weeks in, we don't know what to do if your employee has COVID. But there are 10,000 of you. We need you to do the next right thing, and we will support you in that decision-making process. But we're not going to get this all together here in 24 hours. And lots of leaders thrive through that, like, oh my gosh, I feel so liberated by that. I can just do what I need to do and get done, and the organization supports that. Others, it was a kind of a very frustrating or worrisome moment that they'll make a mistake.
Thank you for those questions. Maggie.
So thinking about culture, you mentioned that you're trying to build it, thinking about growth teams, people coming in. What kinds of things are you doing and do you recommend and think about companies should be doing? Coupled with that, onboarding, when you're onboarding people, how do you solidify business stuff? How do you, hey, you're new, you gotta go do this and you gotta learn and grow.
That's that percent new thing. We're always managing or looking at that and saying, managers will be overwhelmed, can't get business done if a certain percentage of their team is brand new. So then we have a discussion with them, like maybe it's better to bring someone from another team that knows part of the process. It's part of the recruiting process. Do you really want to go external? Because are you going to be able to manage all of that right now? Because you've also brought 3 people on last week. To the earlier point, I'll share one tool. It's relatively new and kind of in a pilot mode right now. But hallway conversations aren't happening. There's no elevator bump-ins. There's no, hey, I have a kid, you have a kid, we're struggling with, being parents together. It's not happening naturally. And so we asked, what can we do about that? It's a big challenge for new employees, for very tenured employees. And so we are in the middle now of piloting it'll have a better name soon, but it's called Grow Your Network. And so we've been doing, I mentioned earlier, some investigation on the power of your network as a predictor of long-term success in the organization. So we look at the centrality of your network and how is it growing and how fast compared to others, and what things. Are you an employee resource group? Does that grow it faster? Are you coming through a development program? Does that expedite your network? And so there's tools we can use to monitor employee networks without spying on them, so to speak. And then we can see the connection of big networks, diverse networks, being a predictor of success. And so how do we recreate that? Because a lot of it is, I see you in the lunchroom and I say, hey, my name is Josh and I'm in talent. Oh, you're in talent? Oh my gosh, I have a recruiting question. That wouldn't happen. And so now this Grow Your Network tool, you fill out, it's really simple. You fill out a quick survey. Who are you? What do you want to get done? I want to talk about personal interests. I want to talk about mentoring. I want to meet someone in a different line of business. I'm about to move to Denver. I don't know anybody in Denver, right? That kind of stuff that you can't have access to in a virtual environment. You label those things. Someone else does the same tool, and then we have an algorithmic matching that's happening behind the scenes. You get an email that says, you know what? You should meet Joe, Frank, and Sally because they have things that you might need or want, and good luck. Because we're not going to over-orchestrate it, because we wouldn't stand on the elevator and say, I'll help you have this conversation. So there's an onus on the employee receiving the note. But how do you recreate that network? And then we can monitor in the back end, was that successful? So we're doing it with our early career crew now, and we're doing it in a particular line of business to see what happens. But that's just an example of a tool to help recreate those networks.
I think another part of that is first do no harm. And what I mean by that is we monitored that at BP. There was a lot of discussion groups, a lot of kind of expert groups that were dealing with just a plethora of informal questions and problems. And then realizing that this looked like a big gamish, management decided to do a reorganization. And what we had found is we monitored on a kind of a regular basis, how many people can you call and informally ask for help on a problem? And the answer was an average about 45 people, which was pretty big. Other organizations I did that with, it was half that. But after the first reorganization, it went down to about 40. After the second reorganization, it went down to about 8. So I think you can really harm yourself in this. And that's something I think, in this pandemic, the informal networks have been savaged, right? They're just, we got to do something to build those back up.
And some of these things may actually be better than before, because things like there was a HR table in the lunchroom. I tended to walk right past it. So, just saying it might be better.
No offense, Josh.
Going forward, just to know, oh, well, they are real people.
Yeah.
So that's good.
How can we help you?
Yeah.
I want to go a little deeper into the supply chain piece. So we talked a lot about talent because it's dominating the concerns, but supply chain is also high on the list as far as concerns. And David, with the work you're doing now, where you're working with multiple entities, what would you coach any business leader to be thinking about as they think about their supply chain, for 2022, but then also a longer term view? If you look 10 years out, don't be looking back just tomorrow. Think into the future. What are you coaching them to think about?
Yeah, it goes to all of our prior discussions, to look at the labor, the capacity, not the singular event of the 100-year, but multiple events, and building in that flexibility. But it starts with going all the way upstream. So you have to start in your supply chain upstream, and work down from there, looking at all the exposures there. Do you have a singular supplier of product? Do you have a singular cargo network? How much of your supply chain is single-threaded? And make it multi-threaded so that you have the options and you have multiple avenues of variable capacity to bring in wherever there may be a problem. So, you don't know, I'm using a lot of water analogies here, but you don't know what may dam up the supply chain upstream. And then, you've got a trickle, right? But you also don't know when that dam breaks. You got to be prepared for, how do I get the people out of the way? How do I relocate supply chain items or work around them? So, that brings in the whole innovation and technology platform, right? It brings in the visibility, the analytics, and the key disruption, real-time events of ports, of political instability, borders being closed. A lot of that stuff is happening, as we see, in a lot quicker time frame and more real time. So having that complete supply chain visibility all the way upstream and planning for those known and unknown events that could happen by creating that agility in the supply chain, is really kind of the key themes. Because what happens is people get a paradigm and something that works, and tend to proliferate that, and sometimes go to an extreme. Take just in time, lean management, offshoring. It works, right? Until you can't get stuff from offshore, right? And you can't get inventory. Guess what? You're in a big bind. You don't have sales for a month because you don't have inventory. So, where is that balance? How do you plan for those events? That's really what you've got to think through, and building in that agility, is key there. You don't throw everything out with the bathwater now and say, oh, I need to keep, and these are real examples. Instead of 6 weeks of inventory, I want 6 months of inventory. Well, really? Is that what you want to do? Versus looking at a little more flexibility in your supply chain.
Steve, in all this supply chain conversation, to me, innovation is ringing as opportunity here. We hear about drones delivering my Amazon package to my front door kind of thing. But how do you see the role of innovation potentially being a part of the solution for the supply chain challenges?
Yeah, I think we want to make sure that we don't retrench ourselves into broken, fragile models. We have to go forward. Trying to keep the same product mix with the same specifications is probably not in the cards. We need to think about re-specifying product requirements based on new customer needs and requirements. Change the mix. We can offer substitute products. We can partner with people that have different products. Of course, we have to understand the customer and the market requirements here, but really expectations are changing. We're in a unfrozen state. If you look at things like hotel room cleaning expectations, portion sizes at restaurants, discounts, delivery methods, wait times, these things are all changing. They're in flux right now. It's expected to change. And if we try to retrench on what was in the past, we're going to frustrate ourselves and our customers. And on the other side of all of this, we're going to find out that other people have made those changes and we have not. So I think there's really a wide window open to rethink our business models, our products, and move forward with new models, new products. I think it's a great time to say, let's cull the herd, let's weed things out, let's really figure out what business are we in and what do we want to do, focus our resources on what we can do as opposed to trying to harken back to fix something that's broken. Let it go.
Josh, when we think about supply chain, when you first think of a bank, you think, well, it's not like you're moving a product as far as a good, an appliance, for example. But you have a supply chain too. It's maybe more on the service side. But when you think about supply chain challenges, what have you observed? You talked earlier about having to rethink how we provide services to our customers. That is us providing a supply of that service. What are some of the lessons that you sort of see that executives need to be thinking about when they think about supply chain kind of big picture issues?
Yeah, I think talent is a supply issue. So it's the most critical one probably right now. And so we're in consultation with our leaders around where does talent come from? Because the supply is really short. And reconsidering what kind of folks can fill roles. Certainly, on the other side, on the business side, supply chain impacts everything that our customers are worried about and doing and thinking about. So we need to hire incredible professionals to be able to navigate those challenges with them. But just, again, putting the talent hat on, we've got to find students in high schools. We've got to find students in two-year degrees. We've got to find students with certificates. We've got to think about reskilling and upskilling, return to work. There's a new thing emerging called returnships. Is that a supply side talent opportunity? And so how are we going to navigate that? And then the tough decisions of what does the balance of contract labor look like for us, and where does that come from, and how do we make sure that it's the right model for the organization? So lots of related supply chain conversations.
We could continue this conversation for quite a while because there's a lot of challenges that we're all dealing with. But let me just give the audience another opportunity. Any question you would like to ask before we wrap up our panel? Yes.
So one question for John. Josh, you mentioned about process expedited doing panel members. Have you considered possibly doing a panel of candidates with that panel of hiring managers, department heads, the recruiter, and so forth, to expedite and see how those students do as interacting with each other?
In high volume roles, it's something that we can certainly consider. I think care center roles or frontline, maybe teller roles. The problem is the volumes aren't at all-time highs in terms of applicants. And so getting lots of applicants to sit in front of a single panel is also a challenge. So I think it's a tactic we could use. I don't know that we've been, right now, we're not having trouble finding the right candidates. It's just the mechanics of the process. I don't know that can be outside of financial services. It is a tactic that we see happening a lot. So in retail organizations, that happens a lot, that kind of approach to interviewing, less so for us, but it's a great comment.
Any other questions? Yes.
David, I'd like your take on the future of globalization versus possibly starting recovery from a supply chain standpoint. There's a lot about that right now.
More of kind of is reshoring kind of, yeah. No, it's a good question. In fact, just had a discussion on this, and depending on the products, the amount that's produced, I think it's certainly one of the options. When you look at the options of mitigating risk in the supply chain, you go all the way upstream, right? Where are your raw materials coming from, right? Where is the intermediate manufacturing steps? Where are they produced? And can they be moved closer to end consumption? And of course, final product, the final product build certainly would benefit of being closer to the consumption points. And we are seeing some of that where before you had a real concentration of consumer goods being produced, obviously in Asia, you had healthcare in Europe. You're seeing some of that production move closer, especially as a growth or mitigation. If I'm going to build a new manufacturing site, why don't I put it at my largest consumption areas as a risk mitigation strategy? So, I think it's real. I think it will continue because of everything we talked about here, right? Is you don't know what's next. So globalization doesn't go away. In fact, that discussion was, well, I'm producing all of this and I get, the raw materials and the manufacturing are over here and I have, referred lift, and because it's a high value, say, vaccine or biopharm, you're going to air it. So you're pretty assured of capacity, but then introduce the other factors, right? Political instability, everything else, and it just leans itself to mitigating that with any expansion looking for those consumption areas.
Let me have our panel close with final thoughts as you think. Let's think 10 years out. It's 2032. What are some of the things that you would say for our students? They're going to be 10 years into their career at that point, but executives even too, as they're thinking 10 years out. What are some of the issues that you would want to make sure is on their radar to be paying attention to over the next 10 years? And Steve, can I start with you, and we'll just work our way back this way.
Well, I think that,
Don't forget your microphone.
in the shortest run, I think we're going to transition back to normal at some point. And that's going to happen, well, right now, the changes that we see are running faster than the decision apparatus within organizations. And the transition point will come when managers, senior managers stop saying, okay, it's COVID, it's the pandemic, we got to get back to business. Okay, and that's going to happen at the quarterly performance reviews, and they're going to say, yeah, that was last quarter's excuse. What's this quarter's plan? And people with good plans and keep moving forward are going to be fine. Other people are going to be looking for jobs. So I think kind of understanding that there's going to be a transition away from kind of this exception mode that we're in right now, it is going to be important. And I think it's going to happen this year, particularly with inflationary concerns, going to put a lot of stress on organizational performance. So as that moves forward, I think the big picture sorts of things. I think we got to look at the global environment. The sanctions on Russia has probably taken them out of contention for a global power for a generation. China, on the other hand, is growing tremendously. 3/4 of the world's population is in the Far East and the subcontinent. The proportion of transactions and the amount of money that is going to be part of I'll call it the Asianification of the world, is going to really be a strong trend over the next decade, and probably by 2050, we're going to see that those business models are really what's going to be dominant. Countries, some of the former BRIC, right? Southeast Asia, India, Brazil will all overtake Russia in terms of economic power. And that is going to change things like most nation-favored trading status, the trading blocks, and the access that American companies have to global markets. This is the trend here, of the Far East and just the massive transactions that's going to be going on is going to change that a lot. Again, I think inflation, we're going to see that really start to impact decision-making by the end of the year. It'll take about 3 years, I think, to work through that. And what that means from your career standpoint and being in organizations that are managing that and organizations that are not is going to be important for your own career. But I think, as it has been in the past and always will be in the future, how we go forward into the future is a matter of will more than skill. You just have to say, we're going to do this, we're going to make it work, and you just got to have that mindset of this is going to work. We're going to make it work, and you'll pick up the skills along the way.
Great. David, how about you?
Yeah, I think one thing we can sum up is the importance of supply chains in the boardrooms and key decision-making positions has been heightened, right? So, and that will continue to be a theme because we saw how much it impacted companies globally, as they were exposed, whether it was a single-threaded supply chain or other issues they were exposed. So that will continue to be an important piece of the decision-making within companies. And the last thing I'll leave you with is another water analogy. So forgive me. When the water's calm, plan for that tidal wave. I think that kind of sums up, the theme of what we're seeing and have seen. And in fact, I'm in a supply chain 50 discussion right after this, part of the World 50 group, and the topics mirror exactly what we're talking about here, right? So it's on top of mind for everybody, and it's going to continue to be.
And Josh?
I told you I'd end with talent, so I'll keep that promise and end with talent. I don't think that's going away.
What was that website again?
There are short-term issues that we'll have to work through in terms of the process, and we'll, I think, over 10 years, see a very different recruiting and talent landscape. But I don't know that the labor challenges will go away, so it's still on the radar 10 years from now for me and for many organizations as the critical function to how work gets done. The second thing, the specific thing that I wonder about as a risk is continuing to chip away at diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was reading the study and seeing how it's kind of been high, been low, come back, gone away. And what's that going to look like in 10 years? And what is the work that we are doing now to stay ahead of that so that in 10 years from now we are not saying, uh-oh, it's number 2 now. And so as you think about talent, the big issue or concern is as we evolve talent practices, what are the systemic barriers, biases that are embedded in our processes and in our humans, our people who are making talent decisions that we have to disrupt. And so that's top of mind for me.
Well, Josh, David, Steve, thank you very much for your time this morning. Help me thank them for their participation today. I also want to say thank you to PNC for being our sponsor host here. Frank, I don't know if there's anything you need to do to close, but other than that, again, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your engagement, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.